I love science history, and this is a unique one. It's interesting because modern science is sort of rediscovering something that has been known in practice for thousands of years. Can you tell us a little bit about the history? And I'm talking about deep history of psychedelics in terms of culture, religion, call it medicine, if you will.
Yeah. I mean, when like you look at like the historical record, like humans have been altering their consciousness with plants and fungi for like thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And, you know, in more recent times, it's been really indigenous communities that have been stewarding and continue to kind of cultivate those traditions. And, you know, we can talk about what some of those are. In terms of Western history, you know, we have the Eleusinian mysteries, which were these rituals that took place in ancient Greece for about 2,000 years, starting around, I think, 1600 BC. And what was interesting is all were welcome, from like emperors to poor people. And there's pretty good historical evidence at this point that they were imbibing this potion called kykeon, which likely contained an ergot-based psychedelic. And these rituals were about death and rebirth and coming out of the delusion of individuality and connecting to the divine. And then, you know, I think there was also a history in Western Europe of like witches and cunning men that got really suppressed during the Inquisition. And a lot of that knowledge really was successfully eradicated by the church.
And Northern Europe as well with the Celts.
Right, exactly. And Russia, there's a shamanic tradition. So this seems like we actually see it all over the world. It's something that it seems, and it's not even animals will take psychoactive plants. I can't even say it's uniquely human.
That's right.
And in indigenous cultures, there's, you know, it's not just for healing. You know, they're often using plant medicines to connect to something bigger than themselves, to connect to the divine, to connect to the community. They use it for rites of passage. They use it for hunting, for initiation. So there's lots of different uses. And then it is also used for healing. Yeah.
And if anybody's interested in that, there's a great book by Brian Muraresku, which I've heard you speak about, The Immortality Key, sort of cataloging all of what you just described in terms of culture, religion, and that sort of thing. Fascinating. Now, in terms of, I guess, more recent history, because I mentioned rediscovering by modern medicine, we have Albert Hofmann, right? He's the kind of the first legendary. Was he a medical doctor?
He was actually a chemist.
He was just a chemist. He was not a clinician.
He wasn't
put it
a
that way. And he discovered LSD.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. There's a funny story about how he discovered it.
Yeah, I mean, so I also studying ergot-based derivatives. He was, I think, looking for a medicine that was either like a respiratory stimulant, and he synthesized LSD. He was doing a bunch of molecules. It was number 25, and I think this was in 1938. And he sent it, and apparently it was tested on animals, and they were told there was no unique property, so it was shelved. And in his book, LSD, My Problem Child, he talks about having this intuition that there was something special about LSD 25. So in 1943, he resynthesized it, and a little bit went on his finger, and he started to feel really strange. And so the next day, which was April 19th, 1943, it was during the war, he intentionally ingested 250 micrograms, thinking this would be a very small dose. Okay. But LSD is so potent that that's actually a really high dose. And so he was the first person on that day to have like the world's first real
synthesized concentrated
LSD acid trip. And he was really high, and he had all kinds of crazy experiences, and his assistant had to bike him home because it was the wartime. So it's now celebrated as Bicycle Day. Bicycle Day. Yeah. Okay. And so he then realized there's something really unique and special about this molecule. And so he started Sandoz started distributing it to researchers and clinicians all over the world to start experimenting with it. And so that was really the beginning of that kind of era of psychedelic research in the 40s and 50s.
So you mentioned ergot. Just to define it, I guess, for the listeners, that is a fungus.
I think it's a fungus that grows on grains.
Grains, right? Yeah. Yeah, so pretty much ubiquitous all over the world. It's interesting, you know, when you think back to whether it's ergot or beer or wine or whatever it might be, first person to ever come across that. Isn't that fascinating?
It's so interesting to think like about how humans discover this. Like even if you think about the plant medicine ayahuasca, right? Yes. So it contains two different plants. So you have the vine, which is the ayahuasca vine. And what that contains is this called an MAOI inhibitor. So it blocks your stomach from breaking down dimethyltryptamine. And then it's combined with a plant called chacruna, which contains the DMT. And so it's like, how did the original people who discovered this figure out to combine these two plants to create that?
In a place where the diversity of animal life and plant life
really
is just through the roof.
Yeah. So the indigenous cultures would say the plants told us.
The plants told them prior to even taking it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, actually, well, there's another fascinating story in terms of technology discovery. Now his name slips my mind, but it's a gentleman who discovered PCR.
Okay.
Have you heard of that story?
It's ringing a bell, but it's not coming to mind.
So I'll put it up on the screen here. But he apparently had some sort of intuition while driving through the Californian hills, high on LSD, stopped his car and had an epiphany moment and wrote it down. And from there we get PCR.
So interesting. Yeah, they were doing some interesting studies in the 50s and 60s where they would give like creative people from different like philosophers and engineers, people who are trying to solve high level problems, they'd give them high dose acid. And initially they'd be sort of journeying, but then as the, medicine was coming down, they would then bring out their problems and actually work on it with the support of the medicine. And they found it increased like creativity and being able to look at the same problem from a different angle.
Right. And then, so if we fast forward a little bit in time after Hoffman, Groff, Timothy Leary, of course, being a huge figure in the psychedelic movement, we have the war on drugs.
Right.
And from that point on, and that was in the 70s up until the 90s, there was basically a cessation of all research, legal research at least. And that would you say that set back?
Yeah, I think we got set back probably 2 to 3 decades by the kind of the war on drugs. It was sort of, I think LSD became scheduled in 1968 in Canada, and it was 1971 that like the war on drugs was officially declared. Timothy Leary was declared to be the most dangerous man in America, and the UN kind of had a resolution that all of these drugs should be restricted.
His what was his motto? Tune
in, turn on, drop out.
Drop out, right? Yeah, and then of course Charlie Manson and that whole thing didn't help.
Right, and it got really, LSD got connected to the counterculture to like the resistance against the Vietnam War. And so some people believe that like the restriction was also about, controlling society.
Of course. And what's interesting, and I wonder how many of these people who put these restrictions into place were on the side dabbling in these things.
You wonder about that.
Of course.
It's interesting. So it was the Canadian Controlled Drug and Substance Act, called the CDSA, was being kind of legislated for the first time in like the very late 1960s. And it was actually Senator Molson, the Molson Brewing family, that advocated that alcohol was safe and should not be scheduled. And same thing with tobacco, but LSD should be. And so we now know the harms that come from alcohol and tobacco.
And now you're using psychedelics to treat alcoholism in some cases, right? Isn't that ironic?
So it's interesting.